Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today again we're going to deal with animations, but in comparison to last week where we have used simple UI view animations to create cool effects, we're going to use core animation today, which is a lot more powerful and a lot more customizable. So if you haven't seen the video from last week and you want to create simple animations, here's a link for it, so check this one out too. And today we're going to deal with core animation, and you have a great variety of possibilities with core animation. So let me just give you a look at what we're going to create today. So this is our demo application, and we have a text field here and an image view. Nothing fancy. And if I'm clicking into my text field here, it starts to shake. This is just for demonstration purposes, but you could use that for something, for a scenario where a user entered something wrong, or you've checked that a specific username is already taken, or something like that. So bright variety of possibilities with that effect. And we're going to use that to have a look at how simple core animation really is. And as for the avatar image that we're having here, this is only a demo again, and you can use this effect also in a variety of scenarios. So I'm pressing on the image view and you can see this pulse originating from its center. So you could use that for voice recording, or using it together with the new speech recognition API to indicate that something is recording, or to indicate that there is a new message from a specific user. And as you can see, you can also trigger that multiple times. You can change the color, and you're going to see how we're going to implement that in a second. But what I'd also like to show you is a trailer of a new Udemy course that I've created, which is great for everyone who wants to familiarize himself with the best and coolest iOS frameworks that are out there. This course is going to give you the possibility to become a real professional, and I'd like to show this trailer to you just now. Welcome to this course about using advanced iOS frameworks with Swift 3 and Xcode 8. In this course, you're going to learn about the coolest and most useful frameworks and development techniques that will improve the quality and look of your app, enhance your productivity, and make your customers so much happier. All the projects that we're going to build together can directly benefit your day-to-day business. You will be able to use your newly acquired knowledge in your own projects right away. Knowing your way around these important frameworks can definitely make the difference between winning or losing in a job interview. Being able to understand the concepts that you're about to experience will make it a lot easier for you to learn about new frameworks all by yourself. This course is constructed as a directory for developers. You don't have to start at the beginning and stop at the end. Every section is self-contained, and in almost every section you are going to create a very cool demo application. So you're going to build a pie chart view that can be configured using Interface Builder. You're going to create a sliding menu, a photo viewer that lets you play live photos. You're going to use collection views, downloading and caching images from the web, using 3D Touch, Today extensions, and so much more. You're even going to be introduced into protocol-oriented programming together with UIKit. The ideal student for this course has already basic knowledge about Swift. You should also know your way around Xcode and be familiar with object-oriented programming. Besides from that, you won't even need a paid Apple developer membership to take part in this course. So feel free to take a look around the course description and have a look at the preview videos. I'd be so happy to see you inside. So this is the new Udemy course about iOS frameworks and great development techniques. And if you're now interested in getting this course, you're getting over 5 hours of video material and all the source code and so on and so on. It's currently sold for $150, but in the video description below you will find a coupon link that will allow you to get this course for just $45. And that's a great deal, which you can use until October 20th. So be quick to get this course for the reduced price, and now we're going to start with our core animation tutorial right here. So let me bring up Xcode and let's create a new single view application for that, which I'm simply going to name core animation. Click next and create that on the desktop, and then I'm going to make my window a little bigger. And we're going to start off with a little user interface, which is pretty simple. We're just adding a text field right here. So I'm typing text field into my object library, dragging this text view somewhere here, making it a little bigger, maybe somewhere around that, centering it, adjusting the auto resizing mask here so that it's nicely centered. And we maybe could also change the background color just a little so that we can see the effect a little better. So I've just changed that to a light gray color. And what we're going to do now is creating a subclass of UI text field to add our animation right there. And in the course that I've just showed you the trailer for, we're also going to do something very similar, but not with a focus on the animation, but with a focus on protocol-oriented programming. So you're going to learn there how you can use protocol-oriented programming together with UIKit. But for us now, we're going to create a subclass of UI text field, and we're calling it shaking text field. And let's create that right here. And we don't need this draw function or the comment here, so we're simply going to create a function shake that our shaking text field is going to have. And to start using core animation, all we really need is an animation object. So let me create one animation constant here, and we're going to initialize it with a CA basic animation. And what we can do here is use this initializer with a argument of key path. And key path is a great way, or this specifying this key path is a great way to decide what we actually want to change with our animation. And as you can see, if you have a look at the documentation regarding key value coding and key value coding compliant container classes, then you will get a lot of information about what you can actually, what kind of keys you can put in there, and also what the wrapping conventions are. For example, for CG points, we have to use, or CG size, CG rect, and so on, we have to use a wrapping class called NSValue, which we have to put in there. But what we can also see here is for example, for transform 3D key paths, we can use rotation, scale, translation, and so on. And what else we can use, of course, is the position, since this is what we want to change for our shaking text field. So I'm simply entering position here as my key path that I'd like to change, or that I'd like to animate. And then we can modify our animation and give it a lot of properties that will define how our animation is going to look like. For example, we can specify a duration, and I'm simply going to specify that duration as 0.05 seconds. We then can also specify a repeat count, which is the number of times the animation will be repeated, and I'm entering 5 here. And let me also use animation and activate auto reverse, which will simply do the reverse thing from our animation, which will create this shaking. So let me set this to true. And what I can also do is using animation and a from value and a to value. And as we have seen, the from value is going to be, so let's just have a quick look at that. From value can be of type any, since we can use different kind of key paths that we'd like to use. Since we want to change the position, which is a CG point, we have to wrap this into an NSValue object, but we are going to do that in a second. So let's first of all create a CG point with an X and Y coordinate, and we're simply going to use the center of our text field and its X position and subtract 4 here for the X position. And for the Y position, we're simply going to use self.center.y, since we do not want to change that. And now all we need to do is creating, or let's just cut this CG point definition from our code, use NSValue, and use the CG point initializer right here, and then paste it in right there. And now we can simply copy everything, including the equal sign, and use animation and to value, and paste our code right here. And all we need to do now here is replace the minus sign with a plus sign so that our to value adds 4 pixels to our current center X position. And this is all the configuration we actually need for our animation, and now we can add it. But we don't add it just to self, we add it to the layer, the core animation layer of our text field. So we take self.layer and then we add an animation for a specific key. And we can define that key, we do not have to define that key, so we pass along the animation we just created and the key, let's just call it position again. And with that, we're actually completely done and our shake animation is configured. Now, how can we trigger that animation in our for our text field that we have created in our storyboard? So let's bring up the assistant editor here and create an outlet for that text field. But before we do that, we'll open the identity inspector and change the custom class to our shaking text field, which means that our text field that we have here in the storyboard now has all the properties and functions that we have defined in our text field, UI text field subclass. So let me press Control on the keyboard and drag that into my view controller class, and let's simply call that maybe password text field. All right, and now let's go to the view controller. And now, as you can see, this is already a subclass, or it has the type shaking text field since we used our subclass shaking text field for that. And we actually want to trigger our animation once we press into the text field itself. So what we need to do is conform to the UI text field delegate. Then we have to assign self to the password text field's delegate property. So let's assign self here, and then we can use text field did begin editing. We could also use text field did end editing or whatever we like. And now, since we're using text field did begin editing, we're using the password text field and simply call its shake function. And if we now run that in the simulator, we should already see our core animation shake animation. So let's just have a look at that. And here we are, we have our text field. I'm pressing into the text field and it shakes. So you've now seen how simple really it is to create that nice looking effect. And now we are going to move on implementing a specific class that will allow you to use this pulsing animation in every of your applications, and I think this is going to be really cool. So let's click on the shaking text field, press Command N on the keyboard, and then we're simply going to create a new Cocoa Touch class, click Next, and we're going to call it pulsing, and it's going to be a subclass of CA layer, so a core animation layer that we are going to use here. And now we have a plain class. There is just the import UI kit. We have a class definition of pulsing that is a subclass of CA layer. So let's think about the properties that we need to define. Well, first of all, we don't use a simple animation, but a kind of a group of animations. So what we can define here is, first of all, an animation group, which we can directly initialize with a CA core animation group. And then we're going to define all of the properties that we later might want to adjust to create different looks. So first of all, let's create an initial pulse scale, which I'm going to define as a float and set to 0. But depending on the effect you want to create, you might want to change that later. Then we will have a next pulse after, which is going to be a time interval. I'm going to initialize that with 0. We're going to define an animation duration, which is just a standard value. I'm going to define that as 1.5 seconds. A radius, a standard radius, that's going to be a CG float. I'm going to set that to 200. And the number of pulses that we'd like to see And maybe let's just set this to an infinite number so that it just continues to pulse. I'm going to use float and infinity here to get the infinite number of pulses. But these are just standard values that do not have to be the values that we use later for our user interface, and we will make sure to create an initializer that will take care of initializing all of those properties the way we actually want them to be. So before we create our custom initializer, let's use the standard initializer for a CA layer and call super init with a layer. And what we're also going to need is the init with coder, which is required. So init with coder, and let's call super init with a decoder. And then we're going to specify our own initializer, which is going to have several parameters. So first of all, we have the number of pulses that we want to define. And we're going to use a float for that. Again, let's set the standard value to infinity here. We're going to use a radius parameter here, and again, a position, which is going to be a CG point. What we have to do here is call super init, and now we're good to go. We can now change all of the other settings that we'd like to do right here. And also there's one slight mistake here. We have to override, of course, our standard init with layer initializer here, but once we add our override keyword here, everything is just fine. So let's now configure our CA layer a little more. First of all, let's change the background color. I'm simply going to use UI color and a black color here as a default value. And don't forget, since we're working with core animation, we need to convert UI colors to CG color. And I'm going to do that right here. Let's change the content scale here to the UI screens. So UI screen, main, and scale. Let's set the opacity to a default value of 0. The radius of our pulse, let's set this to the radius that we have received here as a parameter. And let's set the number of pulses to the number of pulses we actually received when our default value is infinity here. So we have an infinite number of pulses, but we can configure that. And then also let's set self.position to the position we received as a CG point here. And now that we have initialized our pulse or our pulsing class, we need to create the animations that we actually want to perform, and let's simply create some functions for that. Well, first of all, let's create a scale animation, which does not require any arguments or parameters, but it will return a CA basic animation. And the other one is going to be create an opacity animation. So again, we're returning an animation, but this time not a CA basic animation, but a keyframe animation. So we have a keyframe animation here and a basic animation here. And I'm going to define that as optional for a second so that we can return nil here and not get any errors. I'm going to change that later. But now we're going to focus on the create scale animation, which is pretty similar to what we already did with our text field. So let's create a scale animation object here, which is a CA basic animation, which we can again initialize with a key path. And now you're going to see the strength of those key paths, since I can simply enter transform.scale.xy. So with that key path, I can access the scale and both its x and y properties. And that's really cool, since we are going to save a lot of code there by using this key path. And now all I have to do is use my scale animation, define a from value, which in this case we have to use n as number for. And then, since this is the wrapper class for that case, and then we can simply use a value here. It's actually doesn't matter if we now enter a double or a float. We can now enter here our initial pulse scale. And with that, we have a from value. So this is our scale that we initialized our class or our property with. So this is the initial pulse scale from the top here. And all we want to do here now is use scale animation and toValue, and again set it to an NS number with a value of 1. So we could decide if we set the initial pulse scale, for example, to 0.5 or 0.3 or something else, and with that create different kinds of effects. And now also the scale animation needs a duration, and therefore we also have defined already a property, which is the animation duration. So let's just give it to that, so animation duration right here, and now we can return our scale animation. Let's remove this question mark here since we don't actually want to be it optional. All right, so with that we have created again a CA basic animation. Now let's see how we can create a keyframe animation, which is also pretty simple, and I think you're going to use it a lot after you've understood how to work with that. So let's call this one opacity animation, and this is going to be a CA keyframe animation, and again we can use a key path for that, and this time of course we want to change the opacity of our object. And we again use opacity animation. Let's specify a duration, which is animation duration. And now the interesting part begins. We take our opacity animation, and now there is a property called values. And as you can see, this property gets an array of any objects, and this array defines which key path values, so in our case opacity values, the pulse should have. So we're going to define them in an array. So let's start with 0.4, 0.8, and 1. So I have chosen those values to look good. You could change them, but these are the opacity values our pulse is going to have. So next question is, when are they going to have that value? And therefore we're using opacity animation and key times. And setting the key times property allows us to specify at which point in time the keyframes occur, and they are specified as fractions of the total duration of our keyframe animation. So let's now define them at 0, 0.2, and 1. Again, I have selected those times because I think it looks good. You could change them. And now instead of returning nil, we are returning our opacity animation, and again we don't want this to return an optional value actually. So with that done, we now have two animations, and as I told you earlier, our complete animation consists of a group of animations. So let's create a new function called setup animation group, and we are now taking self in our animation group property, and let's just reinitialize that right here and make some more space. And with our group now, we can define the duration of this animation group. So let's use self animation group and the duration, and let's set it to animation duration and add the next pulse after time interval. So this is going to be the complete duration of the animation group. And then again, we use the animation duration. As you can see, we can also leave out the self here. Just wanted to point out that this is a property of this class, so let's again use it. And let's use the repeat count animation group and its repeat count, and here we're simply going to use the number of pulses. And now what we can also define here is a so-called animation curve, which is interesting since this defines kind of how our animation feels. So let's use a default curve here, and we're using CA media timing function here. And as you can see, we can pass along a name here, and so we have different constants that we can use, which is KCA media timing function. And as you can see, we have the possibility of easing in and out. And this is pretty similar to what you can do with UI view animations. And we're simply going to use the default value, which adapts our default or our animation to how the default system animations feel. And now let's simply use our animation group and add the timing function or the default curve as the timing function here. And now we take again our animation group and pass along the animations that we have already created. And this needs to be an array, so we access this property, pass along an array, and here we simply call our two functions, create scale animation and create opacity animation. And with that, we're pretty much done with creating our animations. So let's scroll back to the top, and what we can do here now is calling the specific functions and adding our animation to the layer itself. But before we do that, let's simply have two more adjustments. First of all, we forgot to set the bounds, so let's set this by using self.bounds and then cgrect, and then we set this to 0, 0, and we use the radius times 2 to get the diameter of our circle, and again radius times 2 for the height. And then we also need to make sure that we are a circle and not a rect, actually. So let's use self and corner radius and set it to the radius property. And now we can actually add or set up, let's say self setup animation group. Here again, we can leave the self out as we could here, except for the function of for the properties, where the properties and our parameters do have the same name. So for radius, number of pulses, and position, there you definitely should use self. And now, after we did the setup of our animation group, what we can do is use self.add and simply add our animation group as an animation. So let's use the animation group here for a key, and here let's this time use pulse. And with that, we are actually done. But what we can do is do a little optimization here, since the setup of our animations could occur very frequently, and this also takes some system power. What we can do is put that into a background thread, and the actual adding of the animation we could again put on the main thread, since this has something to do with the user interface. So let's use a dispatch queue and the global dispatch queue with quality of service parameter. Let's use the default quality of service class here, and then let's perform the setup animation group asynchronously. Now we definitely have to use self.setup animation group, and after we did that, we again use the dispatch queue, this time the main queue, and again perform something here. And what we want to perform is self and add our animation group for the key pulse, but again we have to use self animation group here since we're within a closure. And now we can build the application, and it seems that we do not have any errors here. So let's move back to the main storyboard, or to the image assets actually, since I have to drag my avatar image into our project. Let's use that as a 2x version. And now I'm simply going to add a UI image view to my storyboard. Let's set this maybe to 100 by 100 pixels, so 100. Let's deactivate the auto resizing masks and simply center it right there. I'm going to add the image avatar here using the attributes inspector and select aspect fill here, just to make sure that all the images are going to look the same. And then all we need to do now is actually connecting our image view to our view controller. So let's press Control and drag an outlet to our view controller class. Let's call it avatar image view. Connect that. All right. And to be able to actually press on our avatar image view, we have to do a little setup First of all, we need to take the avatar image view and set is user interaction enabled to true, otherwise we can't really press on it. And then we also need a tap gesture recognizer here to actually make this tappable. So let's initialize this tap gesture recognizer here, target self. The selector is going to be, let's just use selector here, and make sure all the parentheses are set. And then we're creating the function that we're going to use, and let's call that add pulse. It's going to function that we're going to use here. So this is going to happen when we press on the image. And now I'm using view controller dot add pulse for the UI tap gesture recognizer. And we're configuring the tap gesture recognizer with the number of taps that are required. We simply want to use one tap to trigger that function, and then we have to add this gesture recognizer to our avatar image view. So let's call add gesture recognizer, and this is going to be the tap gesture recognizer. And this is all the setup that we actually need. And now we can create our pulse. So let's create a pulse object here and initialize it with pulsing. And now we can give that some properties or parameters, like the number of pulses that we'd like to see, the radius, and the position. So let's choose one pulse with a radius of 110 pixels because our image is 100 by 100. So we could create a pulse that's a little larger. And the position or the origin of our pulse is going to be the avatar image view and its center. And then all we need to do to make our pulse actually visible is to use our view or self.view of the view controller and insert a sublayer below a subview. Or no, we just actually want to use Then we could also maybe change the pulse's animation duration. So let's set this to about 0.8 seconds. Let's maybe also change the background color of the pulse. So we could use UI color, blue color, for example, and CG color. And then all we need to do to make our pulse visible is use self.view and our layer of our view. And then we can insert a sublayer below a layer. So let's insert the pulse, which is a CA layer, right below the avatar image view and its layer. And now let's run our application and see what happens and if we are actually able to see a pulse. So this is the demo application from earlier. Here we have the application we just created. We have our shaking text field, and I can press right here. And as you can see, we're already pulsing, but there is a little problem with the opacity, which means that we have to have a look again at our pulsing class, and especially a look at the create opacity animation. And as you can see, what we really did was for the values, we set the last alpha or the last opacity value was 1, and of course it needs to be 0 so that it really fades out. So let's now run our application again with this slight change here. Bring up the simulator and see how our pulse looks like. And this is really, really great. So I can press multiple times and I really like it. And this is all we needed to do for that. As you can see, it's pretty little code, and you have seen how to create basic animations, you have seen how to create keyframe animations, you have seen how to create animation groups, and I hope that this is a very powerful technique that allows you to create really cool animations in your own applications, and I hope that you're going to enjoy this new Udemy course. And again, the discount code for this Udemy course is in the video description below. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.